Power doesn't always look like domination. It doesn't always mean holding on to something forever. Sometimes, power is about shaking the foundation just long enough to make your point. Julius Caesar knew that. So did Donald Trump. But here's the thing. Not every disruption works. Sometimes, shaking the foundation just leaves cracks. What happens when a bold move doesn't land? Or when it works, but the consequences spiral out of control? That's the risk of temporary disruption. It's bold, it's memorable, but it's not always controllable. And it all started with a bridge that didn't need to exist. It's 55 BCE. Julius Caesar has conquered Gaul, victory after victory. His legions had crushed the Nervii, subdued the Belgae, and marched through hostile territory like it was a training ground. But across the Rhine, trouble brews. The Germanic tribes don't stay on their side of the river. They cross, they raid, they challenge Roman authority. Rome's usual response would be a full-scale invasion, a permanent military presence. But Caesar knows better. These tribes are mobile, elusive. There's no one city to besiege, no single leader to defeat. And there's a bigger problem: Rome's reputation. If the Rhine becomes a barrier that Romans won't cross, it sets a dangerous precedent. It tells the world that nature can tame the empire. Caesar knows he can't afford that. Rome can't look weak. He doesn't need to hold Germanic territory. He needs to make a point so loud it echoes across the continent. He orders his engineers to build a bridge. Not just a simple crossing, an architectural statement. A Roman bridge across the Rhine. Something that tells the world, we are not stopped by rivers, forests, or fear. 10 days. That's how long it takes Caesar's legions to build it. Thousands of wooden pilings driven deep into the riverbed. Strong enough to march legions across. The Germans watch from the forest, stunned. They expected a skirmish, not a spectacle. Caesar doesn't cross at night. He doesn't sneak. He marches openly, banners flying, armor gleaming. The message is clear. Rome can cross anything. Rome fears nothing. For over 2 weeks, Caesar's troops patrol the other side. Not conquering, not settling, just being there. Establishing presence. Making sure every tribe knows that Rome stepped over the line and can do it again. And then, just as suddenly as it began, Caesar orders the bridge dismantled. The entire structure comes down, piece by piece. Was it a retreat? It was closure. A way of saying, I didn't come to stay. I came to prove I could. When Caesar returns to Gaul, word spreads. Rome crossed the Rhine. The mighty river that Germans believed could hold back the legions proved no more than a line on a map. Back in Rome, even his enemies acknowledged the boldness. The story isn't just about fighting Germans. It's about rewriting perception. Caesar didn't need to hold territory to prove dominance. The temporary disruption of crossing the Rhine was enough to establish long-term leverage. But what if it hadn't worked? What if the Germanic tribes had united and attacked, burning the bridge from the other side? Sometimes, a temporary disruption can escalate into a prolonged crisis. If Caesar's move had provoked more resistance than expected, his legions could have been trapped on the wrong side of the river, outnumbered and vulnerable. A temporary disruption only works if your opponent reacts the way you expect. Sometimes, a disruption fails to provoke change. Instead, it provokes backlash. The world sees not strength but instability. The opponent digs in rather than yielding. The intended temporary discomfort becomes a prolonged struggle. Fast forward to the 21st century. The world is different, but the principle is the same. Donald Trump's tariff war with China wasn't about permanently cutting off trade. It was a disruption meant to force change. Trump believed that shaking up trade norms would force China to rethink its economic practices. Just like Caesar's Bridge, the tariffs didn't last forever. But the message was clear. The U.S. wasn't afraid to challenge economic norms. But here's the risk. What if the disruption doesn't lead to negotiation, but retaliation? China responded with tariffs of its own, targeting American agriculture and manufacturing. U.S. farmers and businesses took hits that weren't part of the original plan. And then there's the perception problem. What if the disruption makes you look desperate rather than strong? If the opponent waits it out and the disruption fizzles, you lose not just leverage, but credibility. Temporary moves, bold statements, long-term leverage. But sometimes the bold move isn't worth the fallout. Do you think Trump's disruption is?